Hello there, this is Dylan from British English Coach, and this is another video in the Master Polite English course. So in this video I'm going to talk about the indirect question principle. Now really there are two parts here. One is that it's a good idea to use indirect questions if you want to sound more polite, and the other point is that question tags will often make you sound more polite. Now don't worry if you're not sure what a question tag is or what an indirect question tag is. Indirect question is, sorry. We're going to go through these in the video. So first of all, question tags. These are very common in native speaker English, and an example is, "You're hungry, aren't you?" Or, "You're Chinese, aren't you?" Or, "You've been to New York, haven't you?" Or, "You didn't like that, did you?" So they're these things we put at the end of a sentence to make them into a kind of question. So the example I've got is, "She works in a bank, doesn't she?" So doesn't she is the tag. Now sometimes they're called tag questions, other times they're called question tags, but we use them a lot in English. Maybe in your language you might just say yes or no. Another way of using a question tag in a very informal way is just to say right. She works in a bank, right? But that won't make you sound more so polite. So there are two things about question tags that need to be known. One, it's that often you have a positive sentence, "She works in a bank," with a negative question tag, "Doesn't she?" Or, "She doesn't work in a bank, does she?" The negative with the positive. It is possible to have positive and positive or negative and negative, but it's not so common, and it won't make you sound polite. Now, the other thing you need to know is that the intonation can go up on the tag, which is a rising intonation, or it can fall, which is a falling intonation. "She works in a bank, doesn't she?" Now, hopefully, you heard a rising intonation there. "You're Chinese, aren't you?" "You're hungry, aren't you?" Okay. Now if the intonation rises, you sound as though you're asking for confirmation, so you don't sound as sure. So it suggests that you're uncertain or unsure. So this will probably make you sound more polite and will give the other person the option to actually disagree or to provide you with the correct information. So try to practice the rising intonation if you want to sound more uncertain. Now if the intonation falls, "She works in a bank, doesn't she?" "You're Chinese, aren't you?" "You're hungry, aren't you?" It invites agreement. It suggests that the other person is going to say yes. So this suggests certainty. And it doesn't mean you're really asking a question, it means you're just expecting agreement. Which is fine, and it's a good way to start a conversation. For example, "It's a lovely day, isn't it?" See, that's a way to start a conversation with someone, and if it's obvious that it's a lovely day, they're going to say yes. Now, indirect questions will also make you sound more polite. If I just ask a direct question, "Where does she work?" I can sound quite pushy, quite imposing, okay? And I'm not really giving the other person the opportunity to say, "I'm sorry, I can't speak right now, I'm very busy." Okay? So if you ask a direct question, it makes you sound quite pushy and it puts the other person under some pressure because they feel as though they have to answer you directly in that moment. So if you don't know the other person quite so well, if you want to sound more polite and give them options, give them the freedom to say no and not answer your question, it's a good idea to use indirect questions. So you could say, "Excuse me, I was wondering if you knew where she worked." Okay, sounds more polite. The person doesn't feel under pressure to answer you. But always remember that indirect questions sometimes sound too polite. So if you ask them with people you know well, they'll think, "Why? Why don't you just ask me directly? You know me well. You don't sound so friendly." So I was wondering if is a indirect question phrase we can use at the beginning. Another one is, do you mind if I asked you where she worked? Or would you mind if I asked you where she worked? So do you mind if, would you mind if? Would you mind telling me where she works? Okay, would you mind telling me where she works? Now, the problem with indirect questions is sometimes they sound really, really polite and completely false or insincere. Now, sometimes British people, well, English people really, we can sound too polite and we sound like Hugh Grant in one of his in one of his comedies. So, if it's not too much to ask, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind telling me where she works. I'd be extremely grateful. Now this is really so polite it will sound annoying and irritating to a lot of people. So use indirect questions, but don't try to use too many, and perhaps don't try to use them too often, because you'll sound too polite, and that I guarantee will annoy and irritate a lot of people because it will sound too false. So let's have a quick summary. Use question tags. She works in a bank, doesn't she? With a rising intonation, and that will make you sound a bit more polite and a bit more uncertain, which will give the other person the opportunity to disagree or to give you their own opinion. Gives them more options. And use indirect questions. I was wondering if, would you mind telling me, could you tell me, do you mind if I asked you? But don't overuse them. You'll sound ridiculously polite, old-fashioned, and you'll probably sound quite false and insincere. Okay, so I hope that helped. That was the indirect question principle, and I hope to see you soon for the next principle of polite conversation. Speak to you soon.